Hey everybody, my name is Laksh. Here is a little video as to why you should major in accounting. So I got an email from a Big Four partner wanting to convince his younger brother as to why accounting is a good major, and I talked a lot about accounting. I'm very dead set on majoring in accounting. I think it's a great major. Unfortunately, other people don't see why, and I hope to convince you in the next little bit this video takes. So my agenda for today is essentially number one, what makes a good major, right? There's tons of majors you can choose from. Why accounting? Why does it make sense to choose this major, right? I'm gonna go into like this little idea that a guy named Scott Galloway has, and next up I'll talk about accounting specifically. So number one, what makes a good major? There's really four questions you should be answering. One of those questions is, what are the kinds of jobs that I can get with this major? Number two is, how much do those jobs pay? Number three is, how hard is it to get those jobs? And number four is, how much time will it take me to pay off any debts, assuming I take on debt? So let's talk about some kinds of majors. Number one, if you look at something like accounting, right? Accounting has a wide variety of jobs that are available to you. You can work at an accounting firm. You can do a little bit of industry experience. You can do something like private equity. You can, if you want to, pair it up with a minor in finance and do something like investment banking. Of course, it'll be harder, right? Which means this question might be unfavorable to answer. But, anyways, there's a wide variety of jobs. So there are a lot of jobs you can get with accounting. Number two, how much do those jobs pay? The pay is actually not too bad, right? Starting off, it's roughly 60K a firm will pay you, but eventually accounting is a job that doesn't necessarily have a ceiling per whatever you can get. If you were to continue remaining an employee at an accounting firm, sure, you might have a cap as to how much you get paid, but again, this cap is very handsome: 300,000, 400,000, half a million, 600K, right? Whereas you look at something like, I don't know, drama or literature or history or something, right? Number one, those majors themselves don't have enough jobs available. And number two, the jobs that they do have available don't necessarily pay good. So something like that already doesn't fit the first two questions. Next up is, how hard is it to get these jobs? I'm going to say a statistic right here. 98% of accountants typically end up getting a job, right? Accounting has a 98% employment rate. This is publicly available information, by the way. I'm not sure how much this statistic has changed in the past couple of years, but in the past couple of years since I have checked the statistic, 98% was usually the figure I got. And even if it's not 98%, 95%, 96%, 90%, it's still miles ahead of some of the other majors that I might have talked about. Next up is debt. So I'll go over some of the statistics at the University of Alberta. I'm a student at the University of Alberta. I will pay roughly $50,000 for my degree in accounting. I already have one internship secured that I will start this January, from January to August, and I have another internship at KPMG from January to April. Now I can't tell you the exact specifics of the salary, but roughly, one of them will pay you 50K, something will pay you 52K, 53K, roughly in the range of 50 to 55K. Again, this is publicly available information. You can look it up online. But essentially, my degree costs me 50K, right? I'm already making back whatever my degree costs within the 12 months of me working, even as an intern before I even graduate. So you can say that the ROI on my degree is relatively high. At the end of the day, your university degree should be an investment into you. It's basically you investing into your skills, which you hope to be able to trade for money later on. That's any kind of job. If you look at an engineer at NVIDIA, they're trading their skills for time, right? If you look at someone working construction, they're trading their skills and their time and their essentially knowledge that they've learned throughout the years of education. They're trading it for money. That's all it works. You're trading skills for money. In accounting, I am paying $50,000 to learn skills. I am getting $50,000 without even breaking a sweat within a couple years of me graduating. And because it's easy to get these jobs, in my opinion, because it's a 98% employment rate, this question is taken care of, which means it's very likely for you to be able to get a job fresh out of college in accounting and be able to pay off any debt that you might even take on with the accounting job. So I want to talk to you a little bit about money in general. You might not think it, but money is actually quite important. It's not the only thing that matters, but it is one of the most important thing that matters. If you were to look at something like drop shipping, right? I don't know if this is still a trend now, but when I was in high school, there was a huge trend of people just wanting to drop out of high school and start a drop shipping business, which is basically start an online business and start selling things. Number one, if you were to look at a business, or if you were to look at any kind of job in terms of the value they provide, if that job were to completely disappear from the face of the planet, how much of a deficit would the world see in value? If you were to see a random drop shipping business just close, I don't think the world would notice too much of a difference in value. But if you were to see every single accountant's job just fade away, the world would notice a huge deficit in value. Essentially, I can draw a little graph for you. I'll draw a little graph for you. Essentially, on the y-axis, we have the deficit assuming that job disappears. And over here we have the importance of job, right? Least important to most important, right? If you were to look at something like, I don't know, a doctor's job disappearing, if doctors just suddenly cease to exist, well, then you would probably have something, doctors would probably be over here, right? They are a very important job. And even if you were to talk about jobs or businesses, it doesn't matter. If you were to have any doctor business, like a private clinic or a dentist or whatever, if they were to disappear, regardless of whether it's a job or a business, it's an important job and the world would see a huge deficit in value. If you were to look at something like accounting, I would call accounting, roughly somewhere over here. And that makes sense because it's a relatively important job. And assuming all the accountants were to disappear off the face of the earth, you would see a huge deficit in value. Something like drop shipping that I mentioned earlier, it's like over here, right? It barely makes a dent in the value provided to the world. And now, why am I talking about this whole value thing? Essentially, the amount of money that you can make in something is directly proportional to the value you can provide. Drop shippers do not provide much value. Therefore, on average, they don't make too much money. Yeah, sure, you'll have those Instagram models, who have made millions through drop shipping, and what ends up happening is that they'll flaunt their lifestyle and they'll try to convince other people to join dropshipping, right? Accounting has a 98% employment rate. Dropshipping, only the top 1% of people who try dropshipping end up actually making some money. And this top 1% isn't determined by your merit, it's determined by pure luck. So, going back to my entire point, essentially what I'm trying to say is that accounting is a high value job. It is very valued in the job market, meaning it is easy for you to get a job. And next up, the jobs that you do get, they pay relatively handsomely. And there's a wide variety of jobs. And assuming you do decide to take on any debt, regardless of whatever school you're at, it is very easy for you to pay off that debt. Accounting is a job that answers all of these questions very favorably. If you were to look at something like literature or music, etc., right? Number one, it's hard to define the types of jobs available. And even if you do that, some of them might not pay as well. The jobs might be easy to get, but it doesn't matter if there's not a lot of jobs available or they don't pay well either. And next up, even if you do take on debt, if you can't get a job, well, then what's the point of even worrying about debt? You're not going to be able to pay it off either way. Essentially, what makes up a good major is the fact that it's able to answer all of these questions, and accounting is a major that answers all of these questions very favorably. Next up, I want to talk about this guy called Scott Galloway. So he essentially has this theory where following your passion is bad advice. Don't do that. Anyone who tells you to follow your passion is already rich, and you don't want to listen to someone who's already rich. You want to listen to someone who is at your level trying to get rich, right? Instead of following your passion, you should focus on your talent, which is something that you're naturally good at, that you can then put in tens of thousands of hours of work required to become great at it. I want to draw a little bit of a diagram for you. Essentially, this is a graph of the amount of effort it takes to go from various positions in a job. For example, let's say if you're in the top 50% of people, the question you want to answer is how much effort does it take to go from the top 50% to the top 1%, right? What most people get wrong is that they think the graph looks something like this, right? They think it's linear, where essentially, if I'm in the top 50% of people, I put in some amount of effort to get there from zero. Well, if I'm at the top 50% and I want to get to the top 1%, they assume that they can put in the same amount of effort, right? They can put in the same amount of effort that they did to go from 0 to 50 to go from 50 to 1%. This is not how it works. This is complete delusion and this is a lie. Instead, how the graph actually looks like is it looks something like that, right? Now, notice what's different in this graph. Here, what we were assuming is in order to go from 0 to 50, you put in the same amount of effort as to go from 50 to 1%. Here, it's a bit different. Let's say you're in the top 50% of people in your category. In order to go from 0 to 50, you have put in this much effort. If you want to go from 50 to 1%, you need to put in all of this extra effort. If you were to look at something like going from 50 to 55%, you put in this much effort. Or if you want to go from 90 to 95%, you put in the same amount of effort, right? These things are the same. But if you look at this graph, the way reality actually looks like, to go from 50 to 55, this much effort. To go from 90 to 95, it's this much effort, right? We're talking about the same 5% increase, but look at the extra effort that you have to put in. This is exactly how the world works in terms of the amount of effort you have to put in to go from a various position to the other. Now, Now, why does this matter? Well, if you remember what I said about Scott Galloway and how following your passion is bad advice, and instead you should focus on your talent and put in the tens of thousands of hours of work required to become great at it. Essentially, what I mean by that is, Rubik's Cubes are my passion. I can't make a living solving Rubik's Cubes. I can't get rich solving Rubik's Cubes. Why? Because naturally, when it comes to solving Rubik's Cubes, no matter how passionate I am about it, it's not something that I'm naturally talented at, which means I typically will end up falling somewhere over here, which means naturally by default, I'm not even in the top 50% of people. That means in order to go from here to here, where the money's made, by the way, the money is made here, right? If you're in like the top 80 to 100% of people, right? If you're in essentially the top 20% of people, that's where the money's made. When it comes to Rubik's Cubes, if I want to go from here to here, notice the amount of extra effort I have to put in. Versus when you look at something like accounting, sure, I might not be excited every single day to crunch numbers, but because it's my talent, I'll naturally end up somewhere over here, right? I'll probably naturally even end up maybe in the top 80% of people, which means if I want to get to the money making zone, that all I need to do is essentially put in less effort than I would have to go from here to here, right? Notice how little effort I'm putting in here. And this is exactly what you should be doing. You should be picking something that you're naturally talented at and putting in the tens of thousands of hours of work to go from here to here. Now, accounting for me perfectly fits this criteria because I'm feel like I'm naturally talented enough at it, which allows me to put in a little more effort to get to the money making area. Whereas something that I'm completely untalented at, it won't make a dent in terms of my lifetime earnings. And I want to talk to you about the fact that various majors will have various curves. For example, accounting will typically end up looking something like this, right? At the end of the day, no matter where you are, no matter what industry you're in, the top will always tend to shoot up because to go from like 98% to 99%, that extra 1% at the end makes a huge difference. But, from here, it's relatively shallow. Whereas if you look at something like finance, it'll typically end up looking like that. Sorry, it'll end up looking like that a little bit. Where, yeah, at the end, it's still going to shoot up. But even to go from, 30 to 50%, you still have to put in a lot more effort compared to something like accounting to go from 30 to 50%. And the reason being is, finance stereotypically and traditionally is a harder major and field and career than accounting, right? So again, the way you should pick your major should be dependent on these curves as well, where how likely are you to end up in this area naturally, and are you willing to put in the effort to go from here to here? Now, you might be listening to this and say that, you know what, I've taken a college class about accounting already, and I failed it and I sucked at it. Well, if this guy tells me to follow my talent and accounting clearly isn't my talent, should I even bother? The point that I want to stress is this thing again, right? How bad do you want it at the end of the day? If you're watching this video at the end of the day, it's basically me trying to convince you of the fact that accounting is something that ends up here where it's a high value major. It's something that answers all of these questions favorably, right? And if you want it bad enough, you will figure out a way to get good at it. That's something I necessarily can't help you with. There's tons of other online resources like, learning with AI or other YouTube channels that could help you learn the exact specifics of accounting. This is me simply trying to sell you on the idea of majoring in accounting because it has a very, very steady and guaranteed supply of money and income following it, but it also is something that provides a ton of value to the world, and it's something that other majors lack. Next up is going into accounting a bit in specifics. A lot of people have this negative context that AI is going to take over accounting. Good, I welcome it. I want AI to take over accounting jobs. Essentially, what's happening is right now people think of accounting as just you sitting at a desk like this from 9 to 5 crunching numbers at your computer, right? And sure, that might seem like what it looks like, but and sure, that might feel like what it is, but I promise you that's far from the reality. At the end of the day, the entire thing that makes accounting a high value major is that the value you're able to provide comes in directly from the advice you're able to give to the business, right? As an accountant, I can paint myself as a bean counter accountant, or I can do something more high value, such as providing strategic business advice. I will never call myself an accountant, actually. All I'm going to say is I'm a problem solver. My weapon of choice is accounting. I have other weapons. I call them AI, I call them public speaking, I call them marketing, right? At the end of the day, any client situation, it will completely be different as to the ratio of the weapons I have to bring. One situation might require more accounting knowledge than something else, right? If I have a client who's in, I don't know, the movie business, well, I might need to bring in a little bit of strategic marketing advice or public speaking advice, and I have to shrink my wedge of accounting knowledge a bit more. Versus if it's like a financial client, then I might need to increase my wedge of accounting. At the end of the day, all I'm planning to do with my accounting degree is build up a toolkit that I can then deploy, essentially build up my weapon of choice, such that I'm able to provide high value strategic advice to the client. That is what accountants will get paid for, providing the high value strategic account. Uh, that is what accountants will get paid for, providing that high value strategic advice. It's not just making the balance sheets and making the numbers line up. Honestly, nowadays, even AI can do a good job at that. And that's exactly what you want happening. In the next 15 years, 75% of CPAs in America are going to retire. So you have a massive shortfall in supply. Next up, you have a massive increase in demand because everyone and their dog, frankly, has a new AI startup nowadays. So you have this massive demand, you have a shortfall in supply. That means it's very high compensation for something like accounting. And going back to this, that means these questions are even more favorable because it's even easier to get those jobs and there's even more jobs available. But, anyways, back to my point. There's a high demand of accountants, there's low supply. That means the accountants themselves, they're gonna have to outsource some of that, some of that busy work, some of that compiling of the balance sheet, some of that making the numbers crunch up, right? All that stuff is what's going to get outsourced to AI, and the actual value proportion of accounting, right? The actual value proportion of accounting is going to come from the strategic business advice. How you build up strategic business advice is not only building your toolkit of accounting, but adding other toolkits with it. So, if you're unsure of majoring in accounting, don't think of it as you exclusively tying yourself to accounting. Think of it as you building up a very important toolkit that you can then pair off with other toolkits, right? Let me paint another diagram for you. Let's say this is the entirety of the population who's good at accounting, right? Let's say these are the, I don't know, top 15% of accountants, right? Because I'm only gonna talk about the people who end up on this end of the curve, right? And whether you end up on this curve through natural talent or you get through it through hard work, that's on you. Hopefully, if you're not already here through talent, hopefully I have convinced you to get to this point with hard work. But anyways, let's say if you were to look at just the top 15% of accountants here, right? Great. Well, you are one of 15%. Now let's say you bring in another toolkit, right? Let's say you call this toolkit AI, right? Let's say naturally you ended up being in the top, I don't know, 20% of people who know how to use AI. Well, yeah, you're a 1 out of 20% here. Well, guess what? Someone who only is good at AI is in this circle. Someone who is only good at accounting is in this circle. But because you now have two toolkits, you're in this circle. And by the way, I should have apologized earlier. My video keeps on cutting out. This happened in my previous video as well. I've tried everything I could think of. I've restarted every device. Anyways, I promise I'll try to figure it out by the next video, right? But look, if you were only good at AI, you were here. If you were only good at accounting, you were here. Because I'm not an accountant, I'm a problem solver, but my weapon of choice is accounting. I end up here because I have other weapons, right? I have other toolkits at the end of the day, right? And then you add in a third cool toolkit, right? I like to call this one public speaking, marketing in my area. So that means you're not one of 15 anymore. You're not one of 20 anymore. You're like one of 1% essentially, right? This is what at the end of the day will get you here. You can try to get to the top 1% by picking one industry and you can try to get to the top 1% by picking one industry and putting in the hard work and climbing up the ranks. Or you can simply just combine a bunch of different skills, right? You can combine your accounting toolkit, you can combine your AI toolkit, and you can combine your public speaking, marketing, whatever toolkit you want, right? Such that you can hack your way to get to the top 1%. This is where I think the world will be heading at the end of the day. You aren't just going to expect one expert in one industry. You're going to have to try to get subject matter experts where you have people who are experts in a wide variety of industries, not just one, but two or three, right? And when you're able to pair those in a unique combination such that no one else can, you don't become one of 15 anymore. You don't become one of 20 anymore. You become one of one. You literally become the top 1% by hacking your way there. So this is probably one of the most disorganized videos I've made because the ideas just kept on flowing as I'm making the video. I didn't have enough time to brainstorm. But I want to kind of provide a little bit of a summary and a little bit of like a little bit of a guideline as to how you should view this video. Essentially, the biggest thing that I addressed is that some industries and some majors simply won't make money because they don't answer these questions, right? These are the passion majors, right? At the end of the day, boring is sexy. The more sexy an industry looks, the less money there is in it likely. For example, it sounds like a fun idea to be a musician or to be a Hollywood star, but what percentage of the can you actually get to the top 0.1% of actors by just relying on, like, your passion? You can't. You have to put something you're talented at. And based off of those facts, I've been able to give you some graphs and analysis, essentially to give you the idea that accounting is a major that very strongly checks off this box, and it will continue to check off this box. Number one, I talked to you about this guy called Scott Galloway, and essentially what I said was don't pick your passion, pick your talent, which is something you're good at. And that way you'll end up naturally in this section where you have to put in less effort to go to the top, whereas something from here you have to put in a lot of effort. Now, the thing is, sometimes you might just be born with the talent, right? And that's great. I think I personally just, I was always naturally good at math in elementary school, junior high, high school, etc. I could probably study 5 minutes before the exam for a math exam or something and still get 100% or 95 at least. And, that's great and all. But hopefully, I have incentivized you enough to understand the fact that accounting is a very high value major with a lot of value to provide to the world and to yourself, such that even if you might not be naturally talented at it, you hopefully want it bad enough to put in the hard work, right? At the end of the day, everyone was born knowing the same thing, which is nothing, which means, I wasn't born knowing how to balance a balance sheet. You weren't born knowing how to compile an income statement. These are all things that people at some point have to learn, right? The only question is, do you want it bad enough? Do you want it bad enough to go through the effort of learning it? Some people are going to have to put in more effort to learn something, and that's fine. Some people are going to have to put in less effort, and that's fine as well. But at the end of the day, do you want it bad enough to end up here where the money is? Right? Next up, I talked about accounting specifically, where, 15%, where, in the next 15 years, 75% of the accountants, they're going to be gone, right? It's an old industry in the sense that the amount of people who are actively working in it are old. 75% of accountants will retire. Massive shortfall in supply. Demand keeps on rising because the world needs better accountants day over day. So, if demand is here, supply is here, right? Simple economics suggests that because demand is greater than supply, as an accountant, you can charge whatever you want and people will likely pay for it because accounting will be something that is high in demand. The jobs themselves will pay handsomely. The clients themselves who hire accountants will pay handsomely as well. And next up, I also wanted to, go over that review of the fact that don't just pick one thing to get good at. In going into the new era of the world, I guess you can't just be good at one thing. You need to be good at multiple things. Accounting just so happens to be a really good thing to be good at, right? For example, the knowledge of an accountant is really useful in my hands compared to the knowledge of a musician or the knowledge of, I don't know, a soap opera actor, right? In my opinion, I can make better use with the tools of accounting than I can with the tools of music, right? You might be watching this video and you might be able to make a better use of the tool of music, and that's totally fine, right? All I'm suggesting is that it is easier to make good use of the tool of accounting, which is why you should major in it, and then you could potentially move on to something that is your passion. Step one should be focusing on your talent and maximizing your talent. Then, step two, if you have time, focus on your passion. Now, hopefully, that entire little ending kind of provided a bit more of a clear idea as to why I think accounting is a great major. Simple supply and demand. It answers those four questions as well as it focuses on the idea of following your talent, not your passion. Now, I realize this is probably one of the most disorganized videos I made, and again, I apologize for that. I made this video very quickly, and the ideas kind of just kept on flowing to me while I'm in the middle of the video. And yeah, I've hopefully been able to convince you to major in accounting. I think it's a great major. I think it's a great industry. I find it very rewarding, actually. I'm able to provide a lot of value to people using my accounting knowledge. I'm able to make better use of it than other industries that I would have been able to pursue. Accounting itself has a lot to offer. There's a reason other people major in it. In fact, if you were to look at any kind of Fortune 500 company, there's a very strong chance that either the CEO, the CFO, or the COO, at least one of those three people have an accounting degree. It's not a 100% chance, but it's a very high chance, which just tells you how useful of a degree accounting is. And yeah, if you have anything that you want to say in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with me, that's totally fine. Who knows, maybe you say something and it changes my mind. But I hope you liked the video, and I hope that the person who this video is meant for, I hope you're able to find value out of accounting, and I hope you're able to make a good career out of it.